You may be in the middle of improving your infrastructure and needing to migrate your data source. Or maybe you're using a third-party service and wanting to add all of your entries from that into your data source directly. You could also be looking to back up your entries in a quick and simple manner. Remote Desktop Manager offers multiple ways to make this task easy and simple for any use case with the use of exports and imports. Firstly, unless you're an administrator, it's important to know that the only way a user is able to import or export entries is by having the proper system permissions. These system permissions can be found by going to Administration and System Permissions here. And right away, it's the entries section that's already been chosen for us. We'll find our import and export permissions here. So once you've given the proper permissions to the proper users, we can click on OK. And from here, there's a couple of things we can do. Firstly, let's look at exports and what exactly an export in RDM is. Exports in RDM are designed to simplify the backup, sharing, and duplication of your data across your vaults or data source, even those outside of your RDM installation. On top of that, we have imports, and imports will allow you to take these export files that you'll create and decrypt them to easily add the contents of that export file into your RDM instance, whether that be your vault or data source that we talked about earlier. There are different types of exports. Firstly, we have our individual and selection exports. So what I mean by this is if we say want to only export this specific entry, what we can do is right-click here, go to our export option here in the context menu, and we can then export the selection either through the RDM file type, which is our own personal file format that we've made. We equally have the export selection with a JSON file that we could use. And we also have special selection. So here we can have a CSV if that's something you're interested in using. The HTML, XL, SX, and XML types are very specific and I'd say not often used. I would probably suggest using the CSV, RDM, or JSON. And for security purposes, I'd absolutely recommend using the RDM file type whenever possible. We equally have a option to do the vault. So as you've noticed already here, you might have noticed anyway, we have our export vault option. So as you can imagine, this will export the entire contents of the vault. And this can be done in either RDM or JSON. That could be something you're interested in. We equally have our data source, which we can completely export. So here we have our all vaults, which we can use to easily export everything, every vault within your data source, all the contents within it. That'll turn into an RDX file, which you can then right next to it use to import within a different separate instance of RDM. Outside of the actual entries and the quantity of entries that we can export, we equally have configurations that we can do. So let's say rather than the contents of your data source, you'd rather just export your configuration in order to allow another user to then import that into their instance of RDM and allow them to access every vault and whatever it is that you've configured for them. We can go to File. Once we're in File, we can go to Data Sources. And within Data Sources, the window, we notice here we have our Export Data Source configuration as well as our Import Data Source configuration. Doing this will allow you to create the file. As you'll notice here, it's an RDD file. And then once they import it, whatever it is that's been configured here, that's including the name, host, and username, as well as all of the other separate configurations you might have made, will then be added to the file, and you can then have someone else import it. Now, obviously, if your goal is to do that with a advanced data source, I would probably recommend making sure that your username isn't added in, simply because you wouldn't want any other users to log in with your own user account. So unless you're using single sign-on or any other type that doesn't require a manual login, I would highly suggest making sure that your username is removed when doing this. Next, we also have our local settings, which we can export. So if we go to File again, we can go to our settings, and here we're able to import and export our settings. So every local setting you might have configured here, all of the options, no matter how they've been done. Let's say it's the dark theme and you'd like everyone to have the same dark theme within RDM. If that is the case, then we can export. And once we export, we'll be presented with a few options here that we can make sure are included within the file. This also includes your data source type. So if you would like to as well get your configurations sent out on top of the actual settings, this is what you can do here. We can add that from here. Now I'll close this. I could take the time to show us the imports. However, I think that most of you might have noticed that a lot of the exports that we find in Remote Desktop Manager are equally given an import option. So as we saw earlier in the data sources here, we have our export option here. So we also have our import option there. If I go to our context menu here in the navigation pane, you'll notice that your export options here are generally mirrored here as well. There are also extra imports that we can add, which I'll get into. So for example, we have our import from Computer Wizard. We can import with a network scan. So you can have your RDM instance scan your network. You can even limit the amount of IPs, if I'm not mistaken, to make it so that your data source would be, or vault would be populated with all of your connections rather than having to create each one individually. We have our Spiceworks wizard. We can also import our My Privileged account and personal credentials here. If we'd like to import from a CSV, this is actually interesting. So let me go back. Here we have our import generic CSV wizard. So depending on the type of import you're using, and by type here, I don't necessarily mean CSV or RDM file or JSON file. I mean specifically the entry type contained within the CSV. So you'll notice here the header format instruction is given 4 different options. So it's important that if you're exporting with a CSV, that all of the entries that you're exporting are of the same type generally. So if you're exporting RDP entries and passwords, those will have to be 2 separate entry exports rather than the same export altogether. If you'd like to have everything all in one file, this is where using JSON or RDM would come in. It would be a lot more simple for you to do that. Equally in imports that might be interesting is our actual import types here. So if you're ever wondering how you can export and then import entries from a separate service, right? In this case, we have LogMeIn, we have RDTabs, RoyalTS, WinSCP. Well, all of these services can be imported from here. You'll obviously have to create the export file outside of RDM, but the import tool rather here will then decrypt whatever it is that's been created outside and make it so that it fits in RDM's format. We have sessions. We also have our logins. This could be either your credentials, right? So from 1Password, Dashlane, some even from Google Chrome, KeePass. And we also have our contacts. So if ever you were using Real VNC or vCard and you'd like to import a contact, this is where you would do that. Generally, logins and sessions are what we find clients are using more often than not. And what this will do is really create a separate entry type if the entry type itself is not necessarily contained within RDM. As you've likely noticed throughout the lesson, RDM offers a wide range of export and import options in order to be able to serve different needs and use cases. I'd encourage you all to play around with these options to best see how you can use these options to your advantage. If you'd like to know more about imports and exports and even file formats, you can always go to our documentation and our knowledge base articles.